Gather knowledge in the world of cryptocurrency right now on 102.3 KRMG, Tulsa's news and talk. Welcome to Cryptocurrency with Matthew J. Moore. Matthew is locally based right here in Tulsa. Questions, comments, concerns? Call 918-460-5764 or send us an open mic using the KRMG app. Now, here's Cryptocurrency with Matthew J. Moore.
Good Sunday evening to you. My name is Russell Mills, and this is Cryptocurrency with Matthew J. Moore. Thanks for tuning in tonight. On this show, we'll explore the world of cryptocurrencies, digging for digital gold, if you will. We'll explore the challenges and the opportunities presented by this fast-growing phenomenon. Matt Moore is a Tulsa entrepreneur and author of a best-selling book called Foundations for Liberty, and he's our host. Happy Sunday to you, Matt. Thanks for joining us, and welcome to your new show.
Hey, thank you, Russell. I'm super excited about this. I think the Tulsa community is going to be very, very happy about this show. In fact, I think we're all going to benefit from it. There's so much to dive into. In fact, I even have my friend Eric Cooper with me. He's my co-host, and he's coming at it from an angle that maybe many of our audience members will be coming from as well. So the thoughts and questions that maybe are on everybody's minds, we are going to be super excited to cover it. So, Eric, you recently got involved in the space, didn't you?
Yeah, obviously we've had a lot of conversations about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, and you see more and more suggested articles hit your phone. So through our conversations, we actually had a plan to have my first purchase on the air. And obviously I was so enthusiastic towards getting to be a part of this that I couldn't wait that long. So I've already purchased. So again, my whole goal is to ask these questions. And Matt, here's question one. Like, how do we dive into this? We could talk about this, and hopefully we will for the next couple of years. But how do we start? How did you get your start?
Mm-hmm. Well, everybody has a genesis story. With cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, either they've heard these terms or they've heard the word Bitcoin, and they dive into it, they read about it, they hear about it, they learn about it in different ways. And so I always find it fascinating to hear people's stories. But my story particularly, my journey began many years ago. I was always fascinated with monetary policy. I was fascinated with what happened during the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And so I just started going down this rabbit hole, trying to ask the question, why did this happen? And then it led me to, what is money? What gives money value? Where does it come from? And eventually, I think it was roughly 2010 or 11, I ran into Bitcoin because, WikiLeaks at the time, they were cut off from their ability to receive donations and payments. And so they started, receiving Bitcoin. And so I looked into it. I was kind of skeptical. Most people are really skeptical about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. Honestly, most people, we just get scared when we don't understand something. And so we kind of steer away from it. But I looked at it. I had those skeptical thoughts. And, well, I'm going to kind of just watch this from afar and see how it develops. And then come into 2016, I jumped back in and I was like, wow. This thing is really appreciated in dollar terms. It's not going away. So I really need to see what I'm missing here. So I did a deeper dive, started to understand the technology behind it, and I was sold. It was I don't want to say this in a weird way, but it was a first love for me. I fell in love with this. So extremely passionate about it because it brings so many aspects of everything. You've got philosophy, political ideas, you've got technology, you've got monetary policy that goes into all of this. So when people ask me what is Bitcoin, what is cryptocurrency, it's like trying to drink from a fire hose. And the best way to have anybody start to understand where we're coming from and understand the asset class in general is to first start at what is money, where does it get its value? Because if you understand those things, it's easier to wrap your mind around the idea of why cryptocurrency has value to even begin with, how its utility is useful. So, and I just wanted to ask you, Eric, do you have any idea about how money works or where it gets its value, the current money we use today?
Obviously when we grow up in schools, there's still a lot of people that think that all of our paper money is backed by gold. You and I have talked about the failing fiat money system. So, Matt, that would be a big question. Is you've brought it up multiple times that our system is failing. forgive me for being a newbie when it comes to kind of the thought process around that, but why is it failing? How does this relate to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
Right. Well, the interesting thing about the money we use today, which you're right, most people either think that it's backed by gold, but it's not anymore. Constitutionally, in the Constitution, it's very specific that the founding fathers put in there that gold and silver were to be our forms of money to use, and there was reasons for that. But really, what it comes down to is money is essentially a vehicle or a tool that represents our time, labor, energy, wealth, and freedom. And more so, like I ask people all the time, like, what's the scarcest thing in the world? Is it and most people will tell me like, oh, it's precious metals, or it's XYZ. They'll have something that that pops up in their mind. But really, the two scarcest thing in this world is our time and our energy. Like, we're only going to be here on Earth for so long, and we only have so much energy. So if we're going to participate in the economy, and we're going to, have our products, our services, our talents, whatever it is that we do, that we're trading or interacting with society, we need a tool to represent that time and energy. And so I think to understand money, the fiat currency is a type of currency, which is that, because there is a difference between currency and money. And each one of these, currency and money, both are a medium of exchange. They're a unit of account. They're portable. They're durable. They're divisible, fungible. And the only thing that makes something a money versus a currency is store of value. So if something has a true sense of store of value and can store your basically representation of your time and energy over a long period of time to still maintain its purchasing power, then it's a good form of money. But the money we have today, the fiat currency, it is literally a currency because it doesn't have the store of value nature. I mean, just to give you an idea, this blows people's mind, but just last year, 40% of all dollars in existence were created last year. Now, if that doesn't blow your mind, I don't know what will.
Yeah.
And so
Can I jump in with a couple of questions,
Yeah.
Matt? So first, fiat is generally like a government issuing a decree that cannot be defied. So is that what you mean by fiat currency? In other words, the government says this is valuable, and it has value because the government says so.
Correct. That's exactly right. In fact, I know it's going to be harsh, but it's something that's forced upon the people because it's by government decree. So yes, it's
so we don't
something
have a choice. We can't make our own. The states can't make.
Well,
money.
and that's and that's the interesting thing about it is, for the first time, things like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency are forms of money that have been created by the free market that the government hasn't necessarily been able to stop.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, Bitcoin was birthed, in that financial crisis in order to maybe solve some of the problems that we have in today's monetary system. And so it's very fascinating because there's been people that have tried to create competing currencies and obviously we're snuffed out. But yeah, that's a big part of it. The fiat definition, most people don't even know what that means.
So my other question was, when you say 40% of the money that exists was made last year, do you mean 40% of the little crispy bills were printed, or what exactly does that mean?
Yeah. So, you could use the term printed into existence, but essentially nowadays it's just a press of a button, digits on a screen. If you go back to that idea of what gives something a true store of value is scarcity. It's like if you've got a rare baseball card, what makes it valuable is that there's only one or very few of them. But the more of something that exists, the less valuable it gets. And so the faith and confidence in it eventually starts to erode. So, yep.
So is that why?
How about you, Eric?
Gold? I'm sorry. Is that why gold is valuable? Because there just isn't that much of it? Because I've never been able to figure that out. You can't build with it. You can't wear it. You can't eat it. Why is it valuable? So you're saying the scarcity.
So scarcity is a big part of it. Obviously, gold has value because we perceive it to have value. If we humans didn't exist, there would be no true intrinsic value. But utility and scarcity are a big part of gold's value. So, yeah.
All right.
Yep,
you are listening.
That's a big part of it.
You are listening to Cryptocurrency with Matthew J. Moore. That was the voice of Matthew J. Moore. And his co-host, Eric Cooper, is with us as well. We're talking about what is money. To understand cryptocurrency and Bitcoins and all that, you got to start by at least a fundamental understanding of what gives money value. That's our discussion today, and we'll return with more of it here in just a couple of minutes. You're listening to 102.3 KRMG, Tulsa's News and Talk. Welcome back to Cryptocurrency with Matthew J. Moore here on 102.3 KRMG, Tulsa's News and Talk. My name is Russell Mills. Thanks for tuning in on your Sunday evening. Coming up here in about 8 minutes or so, we'll have your top stories in the KRMG 24-hour Fox News Center, and of course, that all-important work week forecast. I would like to introduce you to Matthew J. Moore. He's been working on this show for a while. This is edition number 1. Glad to have you. And also welcome to our co-host, Eric Cooper. Gentlemen, we're talking about why is money money? How is it valuable? And how do we relate all that back to Bitcoin? Matt?
Absolutely, Russell. You know, this is a conversation that most people don't have or even think about. You know, they look at these green pieces of paper in their pocket and they use them on a day-to-day basis. But a lot of us never really ask that question. Where does money come from? What gives it value? How is it created? So having the conversation about money and how it works and what defines a money versus a currency is such a pivotal and important conversation to have when understanding cryptocurrency. Because, you know, I always equate it to, if you don't understand what's broken first, you don't understand the value of cryptocurrency and the proposition that it's making to solve the problems at hand. And so I love having this conversation. And earlier we were talking about the concept of fiat money, money decreed by the government, how it's created into existence, how just the last year, all currency that's in existence today, 40% of it was created just a year ago. And that can blow people's minds. We talk about the deficits, we talk about the debt, we talk about, printing money, but, do we really know what that means or how it works? And how does that relate to Bitcoin? Because with Bitcoin, yes, Bitcoin has the attributes of a money or a currency, but it really is defined as a money because what makes something a money is the store of value. Yes, things like Bitcoin are a medium of exchange. They're a unit of account. They're portable. They're durable. They're divisible, fungible. But really, what defines a good form of money is store of value, and that's scarcity. We talked a little bit about scarcity with gold, and with Bitcoin, there will only ever be 21 million of them that are in existence, and so that'll ever be in existence. And so what we've witnessed with Bitcoin is a unique thing that we haven't witnessed in a very, very long time, which is an asset class that is in this evolution process of becoming a money. It's coming to the world stage as a global form of money or a reserve asset. And so when you go through that process, first, it's often viewed as a collectible. When Bitcoin first came out, it was an experiment. It was, these people, they didn't know if it was actually going to work. And that's why you have stories of these, cryptographers and computer programmers who were mining for Bitcoin. And then years later, they lost their hard drives. They lost the information, the private keys that would give them access to that Bitcoin because they didn't really think it was going to become much of anything. And so now we've kind of transitioned over the years, over the last decade, we've moved into the store of value stage. And so we now see corporations and individuals, whether it be Tesla, whether it be PayPal, whether it be BlackRock, Guggenheim, Fidelity, all these corporations are either buying this and putting it on their balance sheet or offering products or services around Bitcoin. And they're using it to hedge against inflation. They're using it to position themselves to preserve their purchasing power against all the money creation that's taking place in the fiat government money. And so we're now entering into that store value stage. But then the stage after that is medium of exchange. Once the adoption curve has continued to climb upward, and we have more and more people using Bitcoin, adopting Bitcoin, using it as a store of value, eventually we get into the medium of exchange. And then at the end of the road, it becomes a true measure of value, a true measure of wealth. So I think it's fascinating that we're getting to watch this in real time. And Eric Cooper, I don't know about you, but are all these concepts, are they somewhat new to you?
Yeah, I mean, if I look back and, obviously in the times where we're trading things, I've got a pelt or I've got crops that I do. So these are something that I can hold and move around. You fast forward to people mining for gold and then the dollar bill. And, my kids right now are in the age where they're starting to find pennies and nickels and dimes around the house, and they're grabbing onto it, and they know that it means something. So, you know, my question here is, like, you know, if Bitgold and Bitgold, it's coming soon, so don't worry about that. That's inside information. If Bitcoin and gold are such good forms of money, then why are we not using them more often right now? I know that some places are using them. We have a conference in Miami coming up, and you could pay with Bitcoin. But I mean, clue me in on this, Matt. Like, why are these not you know, showing up on PayPal or Amazon yet?
Well, I would say that we are moving into this adoption phase where you're going to start seeing more and more of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and stores, you know, wanting to receive these assets as payment. However, I would argue that right now, in the stage that we're in, I actually don't advise people to use Bitcoin as a form of currency to pay for your everyday goods, because as we're going through this transition process into a new monetary system, you're basically having a giant transfer of wealth from something that is truly a deflationary type of money in technology, living in a world that is naturally inflating. So we know, for perfect example, that the Federal Reserve, their goal is 2% inflation every year. Now, they haven't been meeting that goal, so they're going to move it to an average. So as long as they're on average getting close to 2%, then they're happy with that. But I would argue that real inflation is actually probably 15 to 20% a year, depending on how you actually measure inflation. A lot of people will use things like the CPI, but the truth is, Gresham's law, there's an idea called Gresham's law that when there are two types of money in circulation, that when one is decreasing in value, which would be like the US dollar, or one that's increasing in value or maintaining its purchasing power, like either gold or Bitcoin, essentially what happens is there's an incentive to hoard and hold on to that stuff and keep the bad money in circulation. Because, you know, I was telling people all the time, you get that stimulus money, this is not financial advice, but if you get that stimulus money, I'm going to be spending that. I ain't going to be saving that, because it's not going to be worth the same amount of purchasing power a year from now than it is today. So I would argue that through this transition, it's better to hang on to things like Bitcoin as it continues to go through this transition period and appreciate in value, maintain purchasing power. So it's really a big nut to crack here to go through all this, but it's a conversation that I think people need to have and they need to understand, because money is such an important aspect of our life, and this technology is going to change so much of our lives that people don't know what's coming.
So I guess we'll be talking about what is coming. I mean, what you're talking about here is essentially a new sort of monetary system actually being birthed as we speak.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what's happening. And governments are going to get in on it. Corporations are going to get on it. And you have decentralized cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and others that are going to be involved. So there's going to be a 3-point standoff.
Interesting topic. So, something that we'll return to after the news. We do need to take a quick time out, get you caught up on the headlines and, of course, the weather. But we'll be back with more of Cryptocurrency with Matthew J. Moore in just a couple minutes. You're listening to 102.3 KRMG, Tulsa's News and Talk. Welcome back to Cryptocurrency with Matthew J. Moore. My name is Russell Mills. Thank you very much for tuning in on your Sunday evening. We've got about another half an hour to talk about this. We've been taking kind of a deep dive into, you know, what is money? How is money valuable? And then sort of relating that back to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And Matt told us before the news there, this is not the time to spend your Bitcoin. This is the time to save your Bitcoin. So Matt, maybe we could pick it up there. If I was interested in this, and I'll tell you, I'm vaguely interested, and kind of kick myself for not being interested 10, 12 years ago like you were. But how would I get started, and why would I want to save it, not spend it?
Right. Well, what we are witnessing, Russell, is so amazing, because in real time, we're witnessing a technology that is allowing digital information to be scarce. And that's so hard for people to wrap their minds around because we're so used to copying and pasting digital information. So Bitcoin is obviously valuable based off of its utility and the problems that it's trying to solve, but also in its scarcity. There will only ever be 21 million of them. And the best way to describe it right now is like a digital form of gold. You know, we talked about this idea of what makes something money versus a currency. And really the true difference is store of value. And what gives something its store of value is its scarcity. You know, right now, the big problem with the US dollar is that, you know, when you're talking about the Federal Reserve, you're talking about inflation or the government in general, whether it be deficits, the spending, the debt, all this. Most people don't realize this, but the money we use today is a fiat form of money. It's decreed and forced upon the people to use. And it, you know, that might sound a little harsh, but the reality is if you go back through history and you look at the nature of every fiat currency that has ever been tried, they've all failed and gone to a value of zero. So what makes us assume that the US dollar is actually going to beat that historical precedent? And I would argue that it's not. And what we are witnessing right now is a transition period where the US dollar may very well lose its world reserve currency status. And that sounds harsh, and I am not anti-American whatsoever. But the truth is, when you look at economics and when you look at the numbers and history itself, history is funny because it often doesn't repeat exactly, but it often eerily rhymes. So the other macro trend I tell people to look at is look at, you know, every country that held the status as the world reserve currency, they usually held it for about 80 to 90 years on average, going all the way back to the year 1450. And so America has held that status now for about 76 years. So we're getting pretty close to the end of that. And then the average lifespan of a fiat money, which is basically printed into existence with no true intrinsic value. It's just by pressing a button, say, hey, we need more spending. We need to stimulate the economy. When you look at those forms of money, they typically, their lifespans are usually average anywhere from 27 to 37 years, and rarely do they go past 50 years. Some do, but they all eventually fail. And so with cryptocurrencies and things like gold and silver and other asset classes that are acting as a type of preservation of wealth or purchasing power. Things like Bitcoin, they're going to act like a life raft because going back to this concept of utility and digital scarcity, Bitcoin is going through this evolution of first it was a collectible. Now it's a store of value. You've got corporations that are buying it and putting on its balance sheet to fight against inflation. A lot of people will view Bitcoin as a speculative asset, but the truth is, it's been the best performing asset over the last 10 to 12 years. And so it's like, my question is like, why wouldn't you want to have a little bit exposure to Bitcoin at least? And so Bitcoin is trying to solve some very interesting problems. And one of them is trying to take us back to a form of hard, sound money where we have the ability to save and store our purchasing power over a long period of time. I know that's a large thing to unpack, and I've probably said a lot of things that may be new for some of our listeners. But I think it's important to have these conversations because in order to understand Bitcoin, you have to understand all of these concepts and this history in order to really appreciate what Bitcoin is evolving into and becoming.
Here's what I think people may be wondering, and Eric, you may have similar question in mind, which is, okay, you're telling me that this nebulous currency up in the cloud somewhere is essentially more real than the paper dollar I can pull out of my wallet. And I think that it's going to be hard for people to kind of wrap their heads around that.
Yes, and it's hard for people to wrap their heads around it because, like I said, we're so used to digital information not being scarce, being able to copy and paste it. But what the technology, blockchain technology does, which I hope to extremely explore in an upcoming episode, which is this concept that for the first time in human history, we've got something that is going to you can't cheat the system. It's always coming to consensus. It's always it's a mathematical process where these computers from all around the world, and I'll give this example. I know I've talked to you about this, Russell, before, but blockchain technology. If you could just imagine a ledger book. In an old-fashioned ledger book, and you open that book up and there's pages inside of that, and in those pages it's keeping track of all these transactions of who did what and when, and so if you could imagine a ledger book like that as a piece of software running at the same time on millions of computers around the world, and they're coming to consensus and they're adding what they call blocks, which if you could imagine are pages in this ledger, to this quote unquote blockchain, which is recorded. These things you can go back. It's open source information. You can look at every form of transaction that took place. And so the way to manipulate or make the system, break the system, I should say, is extremely hard, if not completely impossible, based off of how it all works. And I could most certainly dive into that if you'd like me to. But I think the thing that people need to understand is the U.S. dollar. It's literally being borrowed into existence, and by the press of a button. Versus where with Bitcoin, you have a system that's coming to consensus saying, hey, no. We're agreeing to these terms. We're agreeing to these rules. There will only ever be so many of these that will come into existence. And in order to change that system or change those rules, developers have to submit changes to the code. And then these millions of computers all around the world that are running this ledger or this software, they're going to look at this code and they're going to go, is it kosher? Is it good? Are there any backdoors? Are there any errors? Is it broken? So it goes through this very heavy vetting process. And then about 94 to 98% of the network has to agree that this new code is really good and that they all need to implement it. And so if 94 or 98% of the network who is managing this ledger system does not agree to these changes, then those changes don't happen. So there's a very high bar set to quote unquote change the supply of Bitcoin or change how the system works in general. So there's an economic and financial incentive for people to not change it because it requires large amounts of electricity, power, and computer hardware in order to maintain this network, in order for it to even exist. And so they're spending resources. They have to pay their electrical bills. And so if you opt in to say, hey, we're going to change the supply of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin that I'm being rewarded when mining this stuff, I'm basically devaluing my holdings. And nobody wants to devalue the purchasing power of these assets that they're holding. So I would say, yeah, that's one way to look at it. So I don't know if I cleared it up anymore, or if I made it thick as fog.
Yeah, Matt. So, I mean, obviously, we've had this conversation. You're talking about a group and a network of people who are all having a fair say in the management of the currency. You and I have talked about this before. That's not happening when it comes to like our central banks and things like this with our current dollar bill. Like, can you maybe tip your toe back into that? Talking about how the money is created right now.
Right, exactly. And I'd be happy to go into our next segment as well, but I'm going to share just a little bit. When you look at the dollar, how it's created into existence, essentially with a fiat form of money, the Treasury issues bonds, and it's basically a giant IOU. And then those IOUs, through a shell game with a bunch of big banks as middlemen, those IOUs end up at the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve opens up its checkbook, which has a balance of zero. They write a check. Presto, new money is created into existence. It circulates into the system. And so through this whole process, new money is being borrowed into existence, and there's interest owed on that money. So if you borrow the first dollar into existence, where are you going to get the extra dollars to pay for that interest? Well, you have to perpetually borrow again in order to keep the system going, because if you don't, the whole system eventually collapses in a deflationary collapse if there's any real assertive effort to pay down the debt to the fiat money system. So the debt ceiling, the debt, all that stuff, it has to go up. And I hate to say that, and I sympathize with all the fiscal conservatives, but the system is messed up, and I'd be more than happy to go into detail as we go into our next segment.
And there's so much detail to go into. I mean, this is a very complex topic, right? And so it's going to take time, and this show is going to take the time to explore all this stuff and make it understandable to folks who are not financially minded. People like me, hopefully, who will understand a lot more of this as we move forward. We do need to take a quick time out. Remember, if you are interested in this, you can go to Matt's website. It's Matt J. Moore, MattJMoore.com. And there you'll also see where you can get copies of his book, Foundations for Liberty. We'll be back with more of Cryptocurrency with Matthew J. Moore after a quick time out. You're listening to 102.3 KRMG, Tulsa's News and Talk. Welcome back to Cryptocurrency with Matthew J. Moore here on 102.3 KRMG, Tulsa's News and Talk. My name is Russell Mills. Coming up here at the top of the hour, we've got Markley, Van Camp, and Robbins all queued up for you after the news and weather, of course. But let's get back into the conversation we were having. We were talking about money. What was the last time you whipped out a Spanish doubloon to pay for your coffee at the Quick Trip? Probably not. So currencies come and go, forms of money come and go, and we're sort of seeing a transition now. Matt's co-host is here with us as well, Eric Cooper. And Eric, we're seeing a monetary system that seems, it seems to be getting a little shaky.
Yeah, some of the things that were mentioned was, last year, 40% of the money that we have currently was created. So here in the United States, if we took all the dollars, all the pennies, et cetera, 40% of that was created last year. So that seems a little odd to me. Our current system, it's not dead yet. And I think Matt would agree with me that it's not dead yet, but it's in danger. I mean, he said every 80 years and we're at like 70 in the upper 70s. So things are going to be happening and things are changing. And even though cryptocurrency has really been going for about 12 years now, it's still being born, right, Matt? It's in its infancy, but we're seeing it, gain a storage of value. We're seeing it now being divisible. So Matt, my biggest question for you is, next week, we're going to go into other topics. We're going to have, financial institutions chime in here with us in coming shows. But for our listener, they're going to ask themselves a question. They've heard you talk about, the historical dealings. They've heard you talk about where money comes from. What are the questions that they need to be asking themselves to incorporate cryptocurrency into their portfolio, into their way of life, and to actually address it as a legitimate thing that is inevitable?
Right. I mean, this is such a huge pill to swallow, so much to digest that, I think the thing that people really need to start engaging, and this is why I love Bitcoin, this is why I love cryptocurrencies, because not only are, you have free market solutions, these decentralized projects like Bitcoin that are controlled by no company, person, government, party. These are all coming to the scene, right? Like they've been around for the last decade. But you also have corporations that want to create their own cryptocurrency. You have governments that are creating their own cryptocurrency, just like China. The Federal Reserve is having conversations about it. So there's really going to become this kind of like 3-point standoff of, what kind of money is going to be used, how it's going to be used, in what situations it's going to be used. So we really truly are in a transitional period, both in technology and in the monetary system. And so, we talked a little bit about fiat money. We talked about, how the government creates its money. We didn't go much into detail, but I think the thing that you need to, as a listener, anybody, I mean, when you're talking about your finances, when you're talking about your nest egg, when you're talking about, stores of value, Michael Saylor, who's a CEO of a MicroStrategies, it's a publicly traded company. He put it really good. He said, we as a corporation, we have all this cash, and it's a melting ice cube. We're sitting on a melting ice cube because they know that the real levels of inflation are much higher than they really are. The purchasing power of those dollars are not going to be the same as they are from, a year or 2 years from now. So how do you protect yourself as we go through this transition and the demise of the dollar system, or the changing of the dollar system? And that's really, having scarce assets, having things that are limited in supply, because as this bubble of liquidity continues to grow and grow and grow, not just in the United States, but even globally, once that faith and confidence is lost and that bubble of liquidity pops, all that money is going to go racing to things limited in nature. And I truly believe that's why, we're seeing things like the stock market, we're seeing housing, we're seeing all these things being used as a form of store of value. And so I think the thing that people need to understand is, what's money, and how are you storing your future wealth, the money that you plan to spend in the future? And why wouldn't you have exposure to, the best performing asset in the last 12 years? And that's Bitcoin. And so I think when you talk about all the stimulus and these checks that the government is issuing, just me personally, this is my personal opinion, that's what I do. But if the government's going to give me cash, whether it be universal basic income or a stimulus check, I am going to spend that money as fast as I can and buy things limited in supply, because the exponential curve on this currency is going to continue to grow, and the debt is going to have to continue to increase, and eventually the marketplace is going to adjust, and inflation is going to be a real problem. So these are all topics that I look forward to continuing to unpack in future shows and having these conversations with you, Eric.
Yeah. And, you know, Matt, obviously I'm in sales. And so if I were to hire or to train a new employee, my whole goal would be basically based off of my time and tenure. I can help them. I don't feel like I'm an expert in sales or anything, but for people who are wanting to, you know, find out more about cryptocurrency, just dig deeper into the history, or just have questions for you. I mean, what's the easiest way for them to get those questions out to you?
Yes, go to my website, mattjmoore.com, and that's Moore with 2 O's, mattjmoore.com. You can find my book, Foundations for Liberty. The second half of that book talks about the monetary system, how money works, how it gets its value. Great read. And then I would be happy to answer any questions. I do consultations. I help people get into cryptocurrency and into the space and understanding it. So any of those things of interest, I would be happy to have those conversations. And if you have questions for future shows, please, you know, submit a question on my website. I would be happy to cover that topic in the future.
All right. Yeah. The website again is Matt J. Moore, MattJMoore.com. Matt is based right here in Tulsa. He also does speaking engagements. If you'd like to hire him that way, you can find out all kinds of stuff about him and about cryptocurrency on that website. Again, it's MattJMoore.com. We do appreciate you joining us this evening for Cryptocurrency with Matthew J. Moore. My name is Russell Mills, and we'll be back again next Sunday and for many Sundays to come at 5 p.m. So do come back and visit with us again.